Hello, good afternoon, Pnawn da. I'm Jonny Hulson. I'm the chair of the Continuous Cover Forestry Group. Thanks for joining to this afternoon's webinar. And we're kindly joined by Alexander Held of the European Forest Institute. He'll be giving a really interesting presentation this afternoon on CCF and fire resilience. I would at this point mention other webinars that we've got planned. There isn't anything in the calendar at the moment, but I know that my colleagues Ben, Solange, Christine, Alec and Polly, we are in the background organising field visits and webinars coming up. Lots of interesting things happening this year. So please do sign up for the newsletter if you haven't already, and just keep coming back to the CCFG webinar or the Facebook page even, and we'll keep you posted on what's going on this year. Just to recap on this afternoon's webinar, Alexander Held will be giving a presentation of about 50 minutes to an hour, and then we'll open up the floor for questions from the audience and some questions and answers. So we're not expecting the webinar to last any longer than an hour and a half to finish before 5:30. So I'll crack on with introducing Alex. So Alex works for the European Forest Institute. He worked with the Global Fire Monitoring Centre at GFMC in Europe and South Africa. He joined the EFI in 2012, and at the EFI, Alex works on the establishment of the European Forest Risk Facility, which I know he's going to be talking about a bit later on, where the exchange of expertise and knowledge, mutual assistance in Europe is the tool to create more resilient landscapes. He's also involved with the Integrate project at the EFI, dealing with disturbance and biodiversity in managed forests. His interest and expertise is really in fire, silviculture and deer management. And I think in his spare time, Alex is a hunter. And if he's not in the office working on the forest risk facility, he would rather be out hunting, I believe. So maybe we'll get him to the webinar later on deer management and learnings from forests in Germany. It'd be very interesting. He serves in the hunting advisory board of the district Breisgau-Ostschwarzwald to present the Ecological Hunting Association. And he's coordinating hunting education of the Freiburg Hunting Association. He actually did his MSc in forest science from Freiburg University in Germany. And he also sits on the ProSilva board like myself. So I've got to know Alex over the past couple of years as we've been working on strategy at ProSilva. So it's my pleasure to introduce Alex, and the floor is yours, Alex.
Jonny, thank you very much for that very kind introduction. Cover forest systems, also applicable with regard to fire. And since I joined European Forest Institute in 2012, I had also the opportunity not only to work in fire, but to work in both worlds, in the forestry world, in disturbance ecology, and together with the activities in ProSilva and looking at the well over 100 ProSilva exemplary forests across Europe, we could observe and collect a bit of experience out of these living labs, not from scenarios in theory, but really observing in these forests where we could see, yes, they are resilient, a lot more resilient when it comes to drought and bark beetle and other pests and disease, but also drought and fire. So today, we want to discuss a little bit about fire first, and then relate it to our doing in the forest, in managing forests and how we manage forests, and what influence that has on the theory of fire spread, fire intensity, etc. Okay, my problem is I like talking, and I hope to stick to the time. I need to share screen. Where's my share screen here? Screen. All right. Okay, title for today, Continuous Cover Forestry and Fire Management. and it is quite a complex landscape, not only in terms of fire, in terms of forestry, but we'll also touch very briefly on the policy landscape and governance and a little bit on society. I mean, all that has influence on our activities in the landscape, in the forest. And before we go into it, I want to just do this one and then go next. Okay, when it comes to fire, this is just a summary of a few days. We are in good company in the world, and fire is basically everywhere. And there are a few red dots and red pixels in Germany, where I'm sitting now, and in the UK and in Ireland. And in the future,
Hello, Alec. Alex, for 1 second. Are you supposed to be sharing your screen with us at the moment?
I am.
Oh, no, we're not able to see anything, I'm afraid.
Oh, right. Okay. Yeah. How about now?
That's
Yes,
it.
thank you.
Good.
Great.
Just start for perfect.
All right. Sorry for my incapability of handling a computer. Right. What did I say to this slide? It's complex because it's not only fire. If it would only be fire to discuss and only forestry, it would be relatively easy and straightforward, but we have policy. We are not alone in the world when it comes to fire, and looking into the actual observed changes in temperature and weather patterns, and looking into even the mildest scenarios of climate science, there's a very high likelihood that we will observe and experience in Germany as well as in the UK, Ireland, a lot more drier conditions, and also see a lot more fires. Funny enough, on this picture, we see basically fires everywhere, and we see not a place where we as humans have managed to eliminate fire from the landscape. So the bad news is probably we're not more clever than anybody else on the world, and eliminating fire will also not be possible in our conditions in Central and Northwestern Europe. Okay, this is the global picture. Continuous cover forestry. I think most of you in the audience are familiar where it originated. This is the original book from 1922 from Alfred Möller, who started thinking about a forest as an organism. And he argued the more complete the system is, the healthier it is, and the more resilient. And this has developed, and we have a lot of living proof across Europe that this concept of forestry is a compromise model of nature conservation and economy, but we're not discussing this. But looking at this very, very old, over 100-year-old definition of a forest as a continuum of space, or in space and time, I like to translate it in our days to the forest immune system. And the more complete the system is, the stronger our organism works. And as I said earlier, we have observed this over decades now with disturbances like storm, pest and disease, drought, etc. And now we're looking into fire. When we speak fire, I have to start a little bit with dealing with some of the assumptions of our Western civilized world when it comes to fire, some basics of fire. And then in the second part, I would like to relate these basics of fire and fire knowledge basically to forestry and what we do in the landscape, and what in the cocktail of fire behavior factors we can influence to the positive or to the negative. Right. Assumption one: fire in a confined space is a good fire. If I ask around, if we have combustion in a confined space, like in a BMW or Mercedes engine people like this kind of combustion. If it is leaving the confined space, like on the picture on your right, we are very, very clear in the public opinion that this is bad fire. So this is, if we discuss fire in the policy framework with society, with nature conservation, it doesn't matter. We have to understand that the assumption that fire in the landscape is something bad is the prevailing opinion. More in Germany, I would think, than in the UK, where you still have a lot of fire use tradition, especially with the heather burning. So there is maybe a little bit more educated public than here. But in general, this is one of the assumptions we have to deal with. Okay. Other assumption is, and this is maybe a very German perspective to how we see our forests. If I travel the UK or Ireland, I see a lot of forests where I don't know how the relationship of the society, of the public, is with forest. But from our perspective here, what you see here is a very idealistic view of how we, as the society, like to see our forests. And in this picture, yes, it is German, and you have to translate a little bit. We see a forest, different tree species, uneven aged. We have carbon storage, we have timber production, we have nature conservation, we have deadwood, habitat, tree, recreation, mushroom picking, work, even funerals, oxygen, water, everything at the same time, at the same space. And obviously, there's no conflict of interest. And this is how we like to see our forests. So the one in all the discussions that we have is fire's bad is the first assumption. Second is this is what our forests look like or should look like. And what we also see in this picture is disturbance doesn't happen. Disturbance is not existing. And this is also a very problematic understanding of a forest ecosystem or disturbance ecology, that these systems seem to be undisturbed, which of course in reality is not the case. Reality check. This is not a picture from the UK. This is northwestern Germany. Okay, fair enough. Sorry. Poor soils. But the reality is this is 100% single species monoculture pine forest from horizon to horizon. Most of these stands are of the same age. And of course, these forests, because they are different from the previous idealistic picture, do burn very, very nicely. What you see here is not a wildfire. This was a training fire that we lit to train fire services how to suppress fires without water. But that's just a side story. But the reality is, when we discuss with people what we do in the landscape, the assumption is that our forests look like this. And in reality, most of the landscape looks like this. Another term I need to quickly introduce in fire management is the threshold of control. Basically, imagine a flame length of more than 5 meters. And this would be the energy release and the intensity of a fire where direct attack doesn't work, where you can have a lot of helicopters in the air or firefighters on the ground. It is beyond the threshold of control. And this is important in our discussion because, as we saw earlier on the world map, eliminating fire from the landscape will not happen. And even if we have very wishful thinking, also we won't be able to eliminate fire from our landscape. And in terms of preventing fires, I find this an interesting concept because once fires burn within the threshold of control, with flame length below 5 meters or 3.5 meters, it's discussable. But then we have fires that we can handle safely, we can suppress safely, and they don't do that much damage. So for me, one of the big questions is in prevention, Okay, if we have a future with fire and we have no choice about it, what can we do to contribute in prevention that we get fires that we can live with really and have acceptable levels of fires? And in this picture here, I don't know if you see, let me, what is my pointer options? Laser pointer, if you can see this, but here's a little firefighter, and here's his hose and water stream, and he wants to fight this fire. And you can clearly see that this fire is beyond the threshold of control. Okay. Other example, specifically not from Germany and not from the UK, but you don't have to be a rocket scientist or a fire ecologist or a fire manager to see this is beyond the threshold of control, and suppression is not an option. Also, we have another threshold of control, very prominent in Germany. I think the UK in general is about 10, 15 years ahead of us in the development of our fire and rescue services. This is a picture where you see the probably vehicles and firefighters best of its class in the world, super equipment, super trained, but they're facing a new challenge. They're facing a fire that is moving in the landscape. This is not stationary. This is not a car accident. This is not a house fire. So all the strategy and tactic our firefighters know will not work. And this is another threshold of control where in the suppression sector, we have to adapt and learn how to deal with fire. So we have different threshold of controls, and we can do a lot to grow our capacity in terms of response through education, through training, capacity building, and on the other hand, in preparing the landscape for fires, not to find so much energy that they burn beyond the threshold of control. Another picture. All right, general example from Portugal. You might remember the catastrophic disaster fires 2017. Over 100 people lost their lives in only 2 fires. And these 2 fires were burning very fast under extreme conditions, and everybody on the ground in fire science and everywhere said, okay, these fires burn so fast that fighting these fires or waiting for assistance or getting more planes was not even the question, because by the time resources arrived, everything was happened. So everybody knows that the response thing doesn't really work if you don't do the prevention in the landscape. Yet Europe's response was very fast. The last fire happened in October 2017 in Portugal, and already in November they started the European funding scheme RescueU to buy more firefighting aircraft and water pumping equipment. That was in the face of all the experience and all the knowledge and expertise out there that these fires cannot be fought, because by far they're exceeding the threshold of control. So that's why I think we have something to contribute to this problem and to prepare ourselves for a future where we as foresters can really make a difference and contribute our part. To do so, we have to dive a little bit into the very, very basics of fire. And this is, again, sorry, this is in German, but I'll have it in English in a second. The fire triangle, the basics of combustion. To have combustion, we need fuel, we need heat energy for ignition, and we need oxygen. And if we don't have either, we won't have a fire. But as we said, we cannot eliminate all ignitions from the landscape, and we cannot eliminate the oxygen from the landscape. So we are left with one factor that we can really influence in prevention, and this is the vegetation or the fuel. So now if we do the next level of complexity, this is the fire behavior triangle. This is describing how fires are spreading, with what intensity they are burning, how fast they're burning, how high the flames will be, etc. And this is the graphic that explains the interlinkages of the different factors influencing that fire behavior. And this again is weather, wind, temperature, relative humidity, nothing complicated for a forester really to understand. And topography, we discussed this a little bit in detail, but topography, aspect, slope, does the sun shine on it or not? Does fire burn uphill or downhill? Again, for a forester, not very complicated to understand. And funny enough, the third factor here is again biomass and fuel. And this is the common denominator in the fire triangle and the fire behavior triangle is the fuel. And when we talk biomass and fuel, I think we as foresters have a lot more to say and to do than fire service by definition. Just a quick example of different fire behavior factors. We see here same weather conditions, same topography. We see Kaluna heather burning in young pine. And the only factor that's different between this fire here and this fire there is one factor, and this is the wind. This is with wind. This is against the wind. So imagine if we have this combination of relative humidity, sunshine, slope, etc. It does get a bit complex in an active fire situation, but it's, on the other hand, not too complicated to understand. And this is very, very important as a prerequisite for us if we think silviculture. What type of forestry do we do, and how can we influence certain of these factors? It does get a bit more complicated if you like it. You can add a lot more detail to fuel, weather, and topography. You can add a lot more detail to the different ignition sources, etc. But our attention today should be on fuel characteristics that we, through forestry and silviculture, can influence. And this is moisture content, vegetation type, or fuel type, the condition of our soils in terms of are they healthy, are they storing water, what's the soil moisture component in it, continuity and availability of fuel, fuel load or amount of fuel, how much biomass do we give to that fire, in what condition, dry, not so dry, with wind, without wind, etc. So this will be a little bit for our focus and the discussion, and I hope when we talk fire basics, you already start relating your experience from your forest management, from your day-to-day business, to these factors that have direct influence and can be influenced through silviculture in fire. Okay, you can make rocket science out of it and add a lot more. But again, and I've highlighted the bottom here. It's small print here, but this is a factor in terms of how the ecosystem, how your forest system is reacting to fire. And we discuss later with close to nature forestry or continuous cover forestry. One of our paradigms is that our natural regeneration does happen on a continuous basis, and we can modify this with the amount of light that we give the ground and the thing. And because the other paradigm is we use multiple tree species, restoration of burned area in many cases that I have observed is a no-brainer because it just happens by nature. So it also has impact on the post-fire recovery and restoration of burned areas. To reduce the complexity of the previous slide, we just have to keep in mind the most influencing factors in fire. This is wind direction and wind speed. Slope, in terms of the steeper it is, the better fire is burning uphill. Aspect or exposition is also relatively clear. If you have a south or southwest facing slope with a lot of sunshine in it, you have preheated fuel and vegetation. And of course, if this is in alignment with the wind and the slope, then you see a lot of factors in alignment for intense fire behavior. If these factors are not in alignment and the fire has to burn, very simple example, fire has to burn downhill on a north-facing slope in a 180-year-old beech forest, then you can imagine that it's impossible under these conditions to have devastating fire behavior things. So now we cannot influence the slope, we cannot influence the aspect, but we can influence the type of forest, the type of fuel, what it is. Continuous cover forestry does have advantages and disadvantages, and we're going to look at some pictures to discuss those. All right, this is a bit of an academic discussion, because when we discuss fire in our landscape or in our forests, we always should ask ourselves in what type of fire ecology and in fire regime am I? I should ask myself about return interval of fire, intensity of fire, etc., and all that. This is a bit academic for Germany, I must say, and also for the UK, because most of our landscape doesn't have a fire regime. Fire is a relatively new phenomenon, but I think it's important that we have heard these terminology of fire regime, fire intensity, fire return interval, etc., to be aware of the future, because I'm pretty sure we will observe a lot more fire, and with that, we will observe an evolving fire ecology in our systems, if we like it or not. And we cannot say that our systems are really fire adapted, because there is so little fire happening in the past that I'm not really aware of adaptation other than a little bit of thick bark and pine, where you could say this is really adapted to fire disturbance. Most of the tree species that we use in continuous cover forestry are not very fire resistant, not adapted. But I don't want to go into detail here. As I said, at the moment, this is a bit academic, but it's worthwhile to think about these things in a kind of starting point of an evolving fire ecology. Okay. We as foresters, we live in a tiny little space in this policy landscape, and you see biomass management is mentioned here as one of these important factors of fire management. But there are fields like human behavior, research, emergency management, ecosystem, social-cultural environment, spatial planning, rural planning, etc. So you see, we are only one, as foresters or land managers, we are only one piece in the puzzle, and it does get a bit complicated. Another good example is the graphic here. These are 7 fields of a complete outline of a fire management system. And you see each of these 7 chapters is subdivided in other chapters, and biomass and fuel is only one of these here. So we have to also be aware of the fact that it's not only our forests and what we do, but we are embedded in this complicated, bigger framework of policies and governance, and some of them are really out of our control. You don't have this because you've left the European Union, but in Germany we do have this. Whatever we do in forestry and fire is embedded in, I don't know how many European policies, from agriculture to nature conservation, that are very, very influential and sometimes very contradicting in terms of fire prevention. We don't spend a lot of time on this, but there are also some good things coming out of the European Union. There are documents like this, land-based wildfire prevention, where a lot of good initiatives are described, and continuous cover forestry is cited as one of the forest management models that are a fair compromise between biodiversity conservation, providing timber, serving the economy, and delivering the best possible ecosystem services in terms of society and climate. Fun fact on the side, if you watch the cover page of this prevention manual, the cover page is a firefighting situation with a helicopter. Comes back to my first slide about these assumptions. So you see what I mean? We talk fire prevention, and the makers of this put a helicopter on the front page. So it is a really complicated landscape outside of our forest, because we all start from different assumptions, and that's why a lot of the discussions never come to a conclusion. Okay, there's also a lot of a lot of material in the European space, from policy advice to training materials, you name it. This is examples from Germany, but there are very, very similar materials available in English and in the UK. But there's a lot. Now, from all this complicated policy and governance framework, we have a few more slides to talk about forests and continuous cover forestry. So now you would agree with me, the two pictures that we see here, this is in Germany, eastern part. We are very far from a continuous cover forest. We're very far from a close to nature forest. A lot of argument is going because, okay, the argument is the soils are poor and you can't grow anything else than pine. And now we've proven this over and over again in exemplary forests, in mostly privately held larger forest enterprises, where they show with a lot of success that even on these poor conditions, you can use continuous cover forestry. You can work with 7, 8, 9, 10 different tree species. And yes, because of the poor quality of the soil, timber growth, tree growth is not comparable to where I'm sitting here in the Black Forest. But it's simply not true that you can only grow pine in these areas. But what we see here is a combination. Okay, it's all even-aged thing. It might be at the moment very fire resilient indeed, because this forest would only carry a surface fire. It would burn the grass, and the trees would probably survive this grass fire. But to reach this stage of fire resiliency, you had to survive for what? Close to 100 years in our conditions here to get trees like this. So you have a risk of very high fire in these phases, from thicket to this is about 100-year development in these conditions, and this is full in sunshine, full with the wind, low humidity, high temperature, very burnable. The thicket and development stage is the same, full sunlight, no shade, low humidity, you name it. Very high risk of losing your forest to fire till you reach that stage. And after 100 years, you have reached that fire resiliency here, and then you harvest the trees. And then you go back to square one and hope to survive the next 100 years. Okay, there are different shelter wood systems, etc., etc. I think you are all foresters, or most of you are foresters, and I don't have to explain the different silvicultural measures. But if we look at the last one here, this could be a picture of continuous cover forestry, where we look at single tree harvesting and we look at this continuity of forest cover. We look at a microclimate that deserves the word forest microclimate. So it's a lot more shady. Temperatures are lower. Wind speed is lower. Moisture is higher. So a lot of conditions that we create that are not favorable for combustion. Compared to clear fell, like on the top here, we have a clear fell situation. Again, the other extreme, we invite a lot of sun energy. We invite the wind. We invite drought and the rest of it. However, we have projects in Germany that claim they can create a fire-resistant forest. And even a close to nature forest or continuous cover forest, like the graphic on the bottom here, yes, it has a microclimate, and under normal conditions, it is not really flammable. When it burns under normal conditions, so 90%, 99% of our fires burn under normal conditions, fires are harmless. They're easy to control. Restoration is no problem. It's not really a big deal. Nobody gets excited about it. But we have to be honest with ourselves. After 10 weeks, after 20 weeks of a drought situation, of high temperatures and no precipitation, everything will be burning. Like Los Angeles, California now, fuel moisture down to 5%, everything will burn. So it's a lie if we say we can create fire-resistant forests. But we can create forests that are a lot less burnable, and we're going to talk a little bit about time and space before biomass, like here, turns from biomass to be fuel, available fuel for a fire. So a picture like here, what in summer, how many days does it take to convert the grass from grass into fuel? Maybe 3, maybe 4, maybe 5 days, and we have converted biomass into fuel. Okay. In a continuous cover forest where we have the different conditions like we described before, it will not take 3 or 5 days. It might take 8 weeks, 10 weeks, 20 weeks for these biomass to turn into available fuel. And we have so many examples now in the past, in the dry years, 17, 18, 19, 22, across Europe, where we could see and observe and collect data from the Prosilva exemplary forests across Europe, how well they survived the dry years and how little they really suffered from pest and disease and, surprising enough, from fire. Okay, as I said, this is repeating the same pictures. As we said, we can influence also here the grass. If it would be continuous cover, we would have a lot less grass. We would have more typical forest flora like herbs and bush and natural tree regeneration. This would also be a lot less burnable than grass. And I don't know about the UK, but in our conditions here in Germany, a forest like this with this grass understory is a very, very clear sign of a too high deer population. And everything gets eaten, and the result is a very grassy forest. And this is one of the first things you learn at Forest University. Grass in the forest in our conditions, and I can't judge that for the UK, but in our conditions, grass is a very sure indicator that your deer density is way too high. These are pictures from a good friend of mine from Scotland. And these are very different conditions from the eastern part of Germany from the previous pictures. But you also see here, you have a birch forest. It could also be a pine forest. And you have a lot of very burnable fuel on the ground. In this case, heather. We also see most of the birch trees are of the same age. I can't really see a lot of natural regeneration in between. And here we could also say, yes, a mild surface fire that goes through wouldn't probably kill all these trees. But again, to reach that stage, it takes a long time, a long period of high risk. And because there's no regeneration after harvesting, we would have another long time of establishing forest. And here, in conditions like this, of course, you need other fire prevention. And we're going to talk a little bit about that in a second. Here are comparable pictures. Also, the two left are from Scotland, if my information is correct. Very similar to what you saw earlier from my pictures from the eastern part of Germany. Trees are mostly of the same age. I can't see any regeneration, but I also don't see ladder fuels where fires can climb into the canopy and develop into a crown fire. And if we manage a little bit this fine fuel, this heather here on the ground, by grazing, by burning, you name it, we would have a very resilient situation in a even aged age class forest for a certain while till we harvest these trees. And then we go back to development stages like this here on the top. Again, a long period, I don't know, in Scotland, probably also 100 years, through a phase of young thicket, very, very burnable, a lot of ladder fuels where surface fire climbs into the trees and you have a stand replacement fire or crown fire. And the other extreme, of course, on the right-hand side here, continuous cover forestry with a focus on single tree harvesting. But you can see the floor of this forest. There's no grass, there's no heather. This is herbs and this is regeneration. Okay, these are a bit of two of the extremes. Both forest types can be very, in phases, depending on time and space, can be very fire resilient. And also in continuous cover forestry, we might have parts of the forest and development stages where our rich structured forests are perfect ladder fuels for ground fires, surface fires, to climb into the canopy. But because in our continuous cover forests, we do not have the same age and the same structure and the same tree species all over the place from horizon to horizon, even if we have fires that climb into the canopies and for a short while burn as crown and canopy fires, they will not, in most cases, they will not continue as canopy fires. Okay, here we have an example. The middle picture, this is from Poland. Poland, I strongly encourage you to visit Poland. A very, very well-developed cooperation system between foresters and fire service, preventing a lot of fires. I think Poland is the third country in Europe when it comes to the number of ignitions, but you hardly hear any disaster news from Poland because they catch most of their fires under 1 hectare. They don't make the news, but they have a lot of fires. But you see here also, this is pine forest from horizon to horizon. And in the middle along this road, they've planted a fuel buffer or fuel fire break, shaded, whatever, with birch trees. And we investigated the effectiveness because a lot of the old East German forests look the same. And because birch is not a really tree that's shading out the surface, the forest floor, under these birch trees, you found high volumes of grass and heather. So if you wish, you could also call this not a fire break or fuel buffer zone. You could also call it a fire acceleration strip, because you're inviting, again, light, wind, and with that different humidity levels. On the top left, we have an example of German Pro Silva, a very spruce and silver fir dominated forest with little openings in between where the mixture of species is coming in. You see a lot of broadleaf in the regeneration. You also see this is small, and we're getting in this different structure in age classes and species. But you can also see because it is small scale, it's in no way comparable to the situation like in this Polish picture, where if you have fire spreading, it will find perfect conditions like, and again, perfect example from Germany, we have 600,000 hectares of spruce forest killed by bark beetle because we gave it to the bark beetle. We put 600 hectares out there in one place, and this can be eaten by bark beetle or by fire. There are lots of similarities. The other picture here, this is behind my house. Silver fir, spruce, oak, lime, cherry, chestnut, silver fir, and the mixture you see, this will not carry a fire in the same intensity, and it will shift. It is a mosaic landscape within the forest, and this is also a mosaic landscape that fire behavior cannot really spread as in this Polish condition. We distinguish because you cannot create fire resilience in the whole landscape. The whole landscape is very difficult to do forest conversion and increase of broadleaf trees. So we combine short-term technical measures like you see here, the removing of dead and slash with mulching robots or cutting control line. But you see here, this is a very dense forest, but it's not really like a continuous cover forest because there's very, very lot of sunshine getting in. This is very burnable. You need to talk with a lot of different people, and you have to be brave and introduce new technology maybe. But I think the secret lies in the combination of short-term technical measures, control lines, fire breaks, roads, with long-term conceptual approaches where we buy a lot of time before biomass turns into fuel. And I think continuous cover forestry, from all what I could observe across Europe, is surely one interesting tool in the silvicultural toolbox to have a positive influence on temperature, shade, wind, etc. Jonny, you mentioned in the beginning the hunting thing. we do have in large parts of Germany, we do have a overpopulation of different deer species. Very often, if we want to convert spruce monoculture, what you see in the background here, these are planted beech trees. They look like this. They don't get bigger than this. And you see a fence. Inside the fence, we counted without planting, just by natural regeneration, 13 different tree species. Outside the fence, none. Now you could argue outside the fence is a very fire resilient situation because there's no fuel on the ground. But in terms of our forest, our economy, our turnover, our timber production, this is of course something absolutely not acceptable. But you see the influence of hunting to our continuous cover forestry approaches, or in any forestry approaches, it is greatly underrated. And we're facing here, I'm not sure about the UK, but here we're facing a century-old hunting tradition, which is definitely based on raising population and not decimating population. And talking and explaining the role of hunting to hunters, where hunting is only a hobby on the weekends, maybe, is quite a complex topic, but you can try hard to convert your forest and do forest conversion with more broadleaves, bring in more structure, bring in more tree species. If you aren't in control of the hunting regime, it's again very, very complicated long before you get to talk about fire. Okay, as this is repetitive, but again, we as foresters, and especially with a rich structure in different tree species and different levels of development in our continuous cover forests, we can influence the continuity of fuel, of available fuel for a fire. We can influence the density. We cannot influence the weather, but with our, depending what we do, clear fell and invite fire, or continuous cover, and yes, we still have fire, but much later in time, we buy a lot of time before our biomass is turning into fuel. We have influence on fuel load, fuel type, fuel structure, fuel moisture, fuel continuity, fuel density, and altogether influencing that microclimate. But again, we only buying time. We shifting the balance a little bit towards the forest and away from the fire. But we must be honest, we're not creating a fire-resistant forest. Okay, this is also nothing new for this audience. The more careful we treat our forest, the better our soil is and the better our soil will become over time. And this is also something we observe in our very poor soils in the east. In our exemplary forests, where we can observe forest development with different tree species and continuous cover approaches, we see a very, very positive development in the soil. Yes, it is slow, but it is possible to have a positive influence to the soil and to the water storage capacity, to your soil moisture, to your fuel moisture, and also to the decomposition rate of thinning and thinning slash thing. So you see the influence that we have for forests on the soil and on the fire is very, very complex. And depending if I'm in Poland or in Germany or in the UK, up in Scotland or on the west coast of Ireland, it is very site specific. So with all the different factors that we discussed now, there's no blueprint, there's no solution, one size fits all. But assessing the different influencing factors in the specific condition is a task for everybody on that specific site. So I hope I could contribute a little bit to bringing together the different understandings from the fire world and from the forestry world. And I want to close with this picture of in the Black Forest behind my house. And maybe we're gonna one day have this idealistic picture of a very, very resilient forest that has no conflict and very little disturbance. Thank you for your time. 55 minutes nearly. Sorry, Jonny, I took a lot of time. Sorry.
No, danke, Alex. That was absolutely fascinating presentation, and it's just whizzed by because it's so interesting. And looking at the participants, we haven't lost any, which is a very good sign for an hour
Huh.
webinar. I'm actually going to go to a question. I will go through all the questions, but a question that just came in, which was about the time horizon. So I don't know whether Ian Hanna wants to ask the question personally, but it's relevant to what you were just saying about the time horizon for forest management decisions. Ian, would you like to unmute and ask your questions to Alex, or? No, maybe he's not. Maybe he's gone away. But basically, his question was: is the time horizon for forestry management decisions a challenge in adopting fire prevention measures, particularly those involving species or age class diversity? Is there a tendency to trust just luck, basically? He says, do we just have to trust the luck and chance when decision time horizons are short?
Yeah, I think it's a problem. This is a problem we face in forestry in general. Thinking about the production time that we need, it's the same uncertainty that we have. Do we really know what product they want in 300 years or not? So we do have that time problem in forestry, that all our decisions take a lot of time. So we can't fix anything tomorrow. And in implementing certain fire prevention measures, we can do things tomorrow. We can cut a fire break, okay? But the conceptual change in the landscape will see phases of high risk. You will have phases of, a lot of ladder fuels. There will be sunshine and heat energy in the system. So I think it is a general problem of uncertainty, but fire especially, and we don't have a lot of time, unfortunately, as well.
Okay, great, thank you. And a question very much early on. Again, it's by Ian Hanna, the same. He asks a question about ownership. He says, is forest ownership in Germany or South Africa or any other country you've worked in is a factor in determining how effectively fire prevention measures can be implemented?
Absolutely, Ian. South Africa on the extreme, everything is privately owned and it's large companies. So you can do fire management, fire prevention, be it breaks or retaining water or changing tree species, you can do on landscape level because it all belongs to the same company. Germany is the other extreme. We do have areas where we have large complex of state forest. We have communal forest, municipality owned. We have church forest, and we have millions of private forest owners. Small scale, medium scale, some are large, but mostly very, very small parcels of land. Problem, complexity added. The original owner passed away 50 years ago, and the next generations, they don't even live where the forest is. So how do you find the owner and getting something in place on a scale where it makes sense is a real issue. So we observe models that work to combine all these owners, like in forest owners associations. We can do fire protection associations to group all these small owners together, but it is a real governance and policy problem with ownership, yes.
Okay, and I remember, Alex, you telling me your time in South Africa where your perspective on fire management changed because I think you said the bush people in South Africa, you said, look how the forest moves to the natural forest and then it disappears. I remember when you told me that story, I found that really interesting.
Yeah, that was something that got me thinking, because fires in eucalyptus plantation and pine plantation, this is rocket fuel for fire. And then in the landscape, you had remnants of old forest or of original forests, and this really served as a fire break. It ran into these remaining rests of the original forest, and fires just went out. And this I was young back then, but this was something we just think, oh, you know, fuel is a factor.
Okay, so Rob Gazzard, Forestry Commission, is asking. He says apparently you're aware that they're reviewing the UKFS (UK Forestry Standard Practice Guidance) on building wildfire resilience in forest management planning. And since 2014, they've highlighted the challenges between ClearFell and CCF systems and the changes in fire hazard. He's asking what research has been undertaken in Germany or other Northwest European countries to provide decision tools for foresters to select the most appropriate system for their management objectives. And I know that you've been involved with the Forest facility recently. It's taken 10 to 15 years, I believe, to develop. I don't know whether you want to say something on that.
Yeah. Hello, Rob. Nice to see you. The forest policy in all the 16 federal states in Germany and all the forest laws are promoting, at least in theory, close to nature forestry. Some of the state forests are actually, they have a doctrine on continuous cover forestry. Clearfell is absolutely restricted to minimum areas of third of a hectare or something. Unless you have what we observe now, these bark beetle infestations on large scales, okay? This is showing also a lecture in resilience because only the monoculture spruce forest got this bark beetle problem, and now we have this bare land. But in general, we don't have the big difference between forestry systems, not in the extreme of clearfell here and continuous cover forestry there. We do have the differences in shelter wood systems and all the others, but it's not really an issue where we have to compare. What we do is we assess the influencing factors as I elaborated. How do you educate your foresters to think fire like they think bark beetle and storm now? Okay, so to get that into the forest education. But very little official research. The most of the fire research here really started with government funding, 2020? After the dry years, so it's not a long time frame, and they're still comparing to the international part. We're still doing some very funny basic research that the rest of the world has done 100 years ago, and we're still measuring temperature and seeds on spruce and if they resprout or not after this temperature and things. And we still do research, funded research in creating fire-resistant forests, which is nowhere working in the world, but we have research projects on it. So you see, we're at a stage I can't really tell you. There is lots of things happening, but maybe the Polish conditions and the colleagues in Poland would have research and data on that, Rob, because there the clear felling is still standard practice in many places.
Okay, great. Thank you, Alex. I mean, do you want to say something on the Pan-European Forest Risk Facility? Because that's taken a long time, a lot of work, and I believe there's signatories from many forestry ministers across Europe to that facility now. Do you want to say something on how that's come about, and is it available for us in the UK to learn from?
When I was invited 2012 to join the European Forest Institute, because they had that idea of uniting, bringing the knowledge on forest risk management together across languages and borders, etc. And we're working on that idea since 2012. And I mean, people like Rob here or others have been on that journey with us. Now we got the signatures of nearly all forestry ministers across Europe. So we have this ministerial mandate to really establish this facility, and it's about knowledge exchange and traveling across language borders and other borders. And I hope with this we can do a lot more in make foresters travel and see other places to get inspiration, not solutions, but just inspirations. We've seen this very successful in the civil protection world. Firefighters, police officers, they can all travel, and they have funded programs from the European Union in civil protection. In forestry, we didn't have that, really. And now I think we're getting there and learning from each other. I mean, the UK forestry standard, what you mentioned, Rob, the building fire resilience into forestry, was inspiration for a handbook that we produced in Germany in a very similar approach, not copy-paste, but the inspiration came from that. And this is the role of the facility, really. And yeah, I hope that makes sense. Yeah.
Okay, great. Another question here from Ian Hanna. How do firefighters cope in CCF? Does the presence of a more diverse understory vegetation present logistical challenges? You know, the movement of fire personnel, equipment, establishing fire breaks, laying fire hose are difficult. Are these concerns misplaced if CCF yields such a significant fire prevention benefit?
Yeah, this is an issue. It is a question of training and exercise. You can avoid in most of the fire management decisions, you can avoid unsuitable conditions. You don't have to go through the most thicket that you find. You can work around it. It is a problem if you do have not so much the structure, but if you have a lot of dying spruce, for example, we observe that the accessibility of the terrain is a problem then. But we mostly overcome this in our fields with when we say, okay, we form a tandem between the fire commander, the incident commander of the local brigade, with the forest manager. They have their common inspections. They have their access roads, predefined control lines where they know if in case of fire, we're using this predefined line, we're using this road, this, etc. This helps a lot. Ian, I think, asked the question. This helps a lot in overcoming these perceived problems in richly structured forests. So it is a lot, like very often, about knowing the place and knowing the right people. And also, you have to sacrifice sometimes in your continuous cover forestry. If in this joint walk through the forest between the fire service commander and the forester, and you come to places where you say, shit, I need space for my equipment, for my resources, I need a staging area. Yes, you do compromise from forestry side, and of course, life is a compromise, but it can be solved by good communication and common training.
Thank you, Alex. That's great. I can see that Rob Gazzard's got his hand up. I'll come to Rob in a second, but got another question here about, it's very appropriate to what you've just said. Should forest policy have flexibility to allow locally appropriate fire prevention solutions? I mean, that
Absolutely.
sounds, yeah.
Absolutely. I think we need in this, because fire is a highly dynamic topic. It's absolutely, if you want to work with that topic of fire, you yourself have to be very dynamic and flexible. And any rules and regulation that is not flexible is not fit for purpose. On the other hand, to enable forest owners, and we're talking small, medium-sized forest owners that don't have a lot of power to do things. At the same time, with all that flexibility that I wish for, we would need an enabling environment where society supports forest owners in fire prevention, because that prevented fire is a benefit to the society, not only to the owner of the forest. A lot similar to the ecosystem services we're providing and not getting payment for. But yes, flexibility plus enabling environment, I think, would be very beneficial if we could have that.
Thanks. That's really interesting. Okay, so Rob, would you like to unmute or turn your camera on?
There you go. Fantastic. It works. That's great. So Alex, thanks very much. Really interesting presentation. Really appreciate that, and great for bringing this discussion to us foresters, and the excellent way that you've done, particularly covering a lot of really background stuff, which is really necessary to explain the story. I'm just following up on my question, and if you don't mind, Jonathan, me just sharing something just so I can illustrate the point, and it's relevant to what you're doing. So let me just try and get that on screen. Share. So hopefully you can see my screen. Hopefully that is there. Good. So yes, firstly, Alex, thanks very much for our partnership on working on this and transferring our approach to Germany. But thank you for taking it to the next level and making it better than we could do. I think what we are looking at here, these are the traditional 6 CCF systems that we use here in UK. And no doubt in Europe, across Europe as well. It's a bit of work we did with Gary Kerr. We were looking at CCF and wildfire back in 2013. And it was trying to establish how do we give some decision-making tools to land managers that they can select the best system for their use. So we've got ClearFell here, CCF here, and we've got ClearFell up here. And ClearFell was very, very simple in comparison because you go through an establishment phase where risk increased to pole stage. You then start your thinning process at pole stage, and then you begin to mitigate risk from that point onwards, and then until you get to ClearFell, then you're back to the cycle. CCF obviously is a very different structure, and it's not just with the final structure that you have here, but also the transformation when you're going from a CCF-based system then into a ClearFell system. ClearFell into
all the way around. Yeah.
Sorry, my apologies. I think this is where I would be very keen for a partnership approach with regards to research. As you know, we're reviewing the practice guide across the whole, working with UK colleagues on this. And I'd be really interested to work with colleagues. We've actually got a colleague from the Polish Forestry Institute coming to join me in March on an internship to look at these issues. So great, you've illustrated that. And this is what I'm really keen to get into, is how can we help woodland owners make decisions? And as Michael's rightly said, it's at the local level. It's got to be at the most local level, not even in the block level, what we call the block. It's almost at the compartmental level. And that's critically important to building good wildfire resilience, isn't it, at a landscape scale? You've got to get down to the lowest detail. So we went about here looking at crown, ladder, and surface structures in terms of risk, to give people an idea, well, actually, what's going to work for me. I need to factor into transformation into this as well. But if there's any other faults that you have, that would be really, really helpful, because we want to get this across simply and effectively. And we've got a breadth of knowledge in forestry. We've got people who are just starting out on new woodland creation just now, and they may be new to forestry, or they may have bought an existing woodland and it's new to them, all the way to the excellent estates that we've got, where we've got some really complicated things happening, but actually really, really exciting stuff. And then they're maybe further forward on the CCF journey than most. So just welcome your thoughts on that particular point, because we are in a bit of a vacuum. We don't seem to have much research done so far, as you've illustrated. And everything's based on evidence now. We're trying to get the practice guide evidence-based so we can be pretty confident about where we're going to over the next 100 years of our journey. So just your thoughts on that would be really, really interesting. Thank you.
Yeah, Rob, thanks. I think this is an absolutely important point. I think more and more forest owners consider continuous cover forestry because of all the benefits that you can observe. And the transformation phase is a very complicated phase of uncertainty, and again, very local. If I do it here where I am, and if I basically, it would be because of the climate and the soil, it would be relatively straightforward. The recommendation is harvest big trees and shoot deer. The rest is happening by nature. Okay, I immediately get oak, I beech, silver fir, maple. It's really easy to relatively. If I go to the east or to other parts where it's not that easy because the soils are poor, the majority of the old stands are just pine, there is nothing else. It is way more complicated. If I can work with shade-tolerant trees, it's again much easier to create that microclimate in the forest. If I can, because of climatic conditions or geographical location, if if I think, or if I'm in the belief that I can only work with light demanding species, then it's not so easy. Continuous cover forestry is better with shade tolerant, easier with shade tolerant trees. So again, it is site specific. Based, as you said, it's not even block. It's probably compartment, because everything is very, very dependent on these conditions. But as a general, I would say the big benefit is also in the transformation stage from H-class system or Clearfield system to other silviculture, is that you're moving away from scale to mosaic, because you get into this gap system of light and no light, shade and no shade, sun exposure, no sun exposure, conifers, broadleaves, and the more we break all this continuity up, we get, and you know that we get different fire behavior. It's like in a heather landscape, you have burnt and unburned heather of different ages and different structure, and we observe different fire behavior in Kaluna. It's very, very similar. And then I saw Michael's comment that at the moment, the majority of our fires are surface fires. And I think it will stay for quite a while that we deal in the majority, we deal with surface fires. Again, the moment we can, through transformation, we can influence the forest surface cover from, in my case, it would be away from grass towards herbs, moss, then I have a direct impact on the availability of surface fuels. This will not work without hunting. So again, you know, it's quite a very, in some spaces I need to shoot a lot of deers. In other areas, I just have to change the hunting regime, not shoot more deers. I just have to adapt how I hunt. So again, it's not a solution or a thing where I say, do it like this. You know? But yeah, we have to have these discussions so that everybody can discuss on site what to do, basically. Yeah.
That's really useful. And the practical question we had about how do we fight fires in these type of habitats, particularly when you look at single tree selection systems, is really pertinent at the end of the day. And from my experience of firefighting in Oregon or in California, or in working with the Portuguese and Spanish, this is a really, really pertinent issue. And I think Mark Castellio's words about us having a higher fuel loading than, let's say, Andalusia or Catalonia here in Northwest Europe is really, really personal, because when it comes to it, we're going to have really, really powerful fire line intensity, some massive amounts of energy coming off. And then the practicalities of getting into the crop to make the intervention, suppression intervention, but doing it safely, with having safety zones and escape routes pre-planned and so forth. The things that we train on our LANTRA accredited training is going to be really, really pertinent. And I think this is going to be a big challenge for things like single tree selection systems, because you are incredibly limited. And I'm thinking back to looking at Cumbria and Westmoreland and Cumberland, where we've had some really bad fires up there in CCF systems. And actually getting into the crop was the issue. The topology was hard to get into, but getting off the road, then into the crop to start suppression, very, very hard. And I think given our baseline, particularly in the northwest of England and certainly in southern Scotland, is going to be a higher increase of wildfire risk in comparison to southeast England, because currently the baseline is very low in the north of England and in southern Scotland, is going to be the big challenge for us moving forward, particularly with CCF systems. So yeah, a lot for us to think about when we are looking at our practice guide. And I really do encourage colleagues on this call, when we do start getting comments out or our papers out to start discussing these issues, really welcome your feedback and your input into this, because that's going to be really powerful for us to move forward and make the right decisions for land managers. Thank you.
Thank you, Rob. That was a really fascinating conversation. And thanks for the UK context on that Forestry Commission paper. The links are actually in the chat. I was going to ask about Ips beetle. You touched on the spruce bark beetle, Alex. Obviously, Ips has been devastating in Germany, but now that we know that presence of Ips bark beetles in the UK, you think the urgency of transformation to CCF systems is something that we should be looking at. Well, we are looking at, because Rob's just mentioned it, but particularly as the threat of IPS is here.
Okay, we lose more forest, way more forest to bark beetle than to fire at the moment. We lose a lot more trees to storm than to fire. So I think we should think risk management in an interconnected way. Fire is good because fire is getting attention. It does help us to get attention to the topic of forest risks. But it might sound a bit sarcastic, but we lost close to 600,000 hectares of mature spruce forest. The economic loss is just a pure drama. But when you drive through these landscapes, and they look like moon landscapes now, you also realize that despite the fact that German forest policy is talking about forest conversion and giving subsidies to forest owners to promote forest conversion, not necessarily to continuous cover forestry, but to increase the broadleaf percentage as a very baseline, you see that the owners of these 600,000 hectares, the moment the spruce dies off, you don't see a single green leaf. There is nothing like a second tree species. It was pure monoculture. There's very, very little on the ground where you see, oh, there's a beech or oak or something else. So despite the fact that we for at least 30 years talk about this and subsidize forest conversion, it's very, very slow. It might be negligence, it might be laziness, it might be the deer. There are lots of excuses. But all the forests that I visited that have this mix of tree species, they have broadleaf, and especially the exemplary forests under continuous cover forestry, even in the dry years, 2018, 2022, even in the natural regeneration, you couldn't see damage. I think bark beetle, I'll show you pictures of groups of spruce super healthy in a relatively dry forest where nobody can explain how these spruces are not eaten by bark beetle, but it works. So that mixture is a thing. In bark beetle, the moment you get a bit of dry weather, and bark beetle is like fire. It likes dry weather and it likes monoculture. So it's very, very similar. And you can fight bark beetle when it's still small, like a fire. So really, bark beetle is really and fire. There's two topics where every green broadleaf helps to slow it.
Yeah, that's I always wondered about that. The response that you have in Germany with the monetary policy with forest transformation, and the fact that you've got the financial. I don't know whether you still have the financial resources for forest owners in Germany, but I know it was quite impressive. That was announced in 2023, 200 million euros a year. Is that still the amount, the budget they've allocated for transformation to private owners?
Yeah, well, and then we figured out we have a 60 billion gap in the budget, and everything's new since then. And now we have no government, and I can't really give an answer what we currently have, except that the law says restoration should happen after 3 to 4 years, and it should be for resilient future with different tree species, etc., etc. And you only get subsidies if you want to plant spruce or pine. You don't get subsidies. Simple as that. So after 10 years, there should be a control if your regeneration worked with different tree species. I can't tell you if that control after 10 years is ever happening. So yeah, it is complex.
Okay. So we are coming towards the end of the webinar now. There's one final question from Ian Hanna. He's submitted quite a few questions. Thank you, Ian. So he's asking a question here. Is demand for public access to forests a significant source of ignition risk? Does the diversity of private forest ownership in Germany contribute to better public education and more responsible behaviour?
this is deeply embedded in our culture that every forest has free access for everybody, be it private or public. Even a private forest, you cannot close it to the public. Yes, where there are people, there is fire. So the more people you have, the more ignition risk you have. That's 100% clear. There's a lot of education happening now in terms of digital smartphone-based education, signs, road signs, newspaper articles, etc. This does help. There are rules in place where under certain fire weather index levels, you can restrict access. You stop working in the forest, and all that has a significant impact on number of ignitions on bad fire days. This does work. But the big question about access to forest is something, even if you would say it would make perfect sense under what fire danger index level orange, no access. It would be political suicide for anybody to bring this in, even in the discussion. So it's impossible here. Forests belong by heart, belong to everybody. You know, the general public doesn't know who the forest belongs to. It's there, and everybody uses it. Yeah.
Great. And I really like that diagram you gave as the sort of, the perfect vision of what, the forest looks like. It's something that I've saved that diagram, but as you say, it's a bit of a utopia and, glosses over the fact there's no disturbance in the forest. We need some disturbance. Fantastic. So on the EU Forest Risk Facility, I suppose that's available online. We just search for EU Forest Risk Facility. Is that
not yet? It will officially start 1st of February. And I think it will take a little bit of time before any homepage is up and running, etc. And then I hope the secretariat of this risk facility will knock on politicians' doors also in Ireland and in the UK for contributions to enable us to travel and exchange and do funny research on what trees do we use in Poland and in the UK and Germany. Yeah.
A very, very quick question that somebody's posted here from Matt North, South Yorkshire. He says about if we plant for the future, we select species that would do well in future climate scenarios. Should we not consider that fire will be more widespread and therefore not plant fine fuel tree species or those that have aromatic oils in the same way? Interesting question.
Yeah. I don't like the discussion really when they say what species should we plant, what is fire resistant, what is bark beetle resistant. It leads here in my backyard, it leads to very simple decision making in, we take spruce out when we put Douglas fir in. One out, one in, problem solved. And, we all know this is not working. It's more complex. I think we shouldn't be too shy in experimenting with new species or alien species. We should be careful in small scale, always in mixture with our natural trees. But I think we should be a lot more open because the speed of change that we observe, and I speak here what I observe here in the Black Forest, the speed is very high. And without assisted support of some tree species pushing them a little bit further, and also seeing yes, some might be more burnable because they come from a fiery environment, and then you bring something that is very burnable to our environment knowingly. But this is all the things, this is a lot of uncertainty and discussion we need to have. But we need to do it. We need to try it. It doesn't help to show PowerPoints, really.
Yeah.
I enjoyed my own PowerPoint, yes, but it's nothing compared. We have to go out and walk the forest and do it and observe and feel it to get, how do I say, to get the wisdom,
Absolutely. Absolutely. And I can see you're in a very nice forest there just in the background in Freiburg. I wish I was in the forest myself this week, but I'm a pen pusher like you. Fantastic. Well, thank you for the amazing presentation, Alex. And thank you to everyone for joining this afternoon. I hope you enjoyed it and you've taken something away to put into practice or training on thinking about fire in silviculture. So fantastic. Thanks. If I could clap, I'm clapping. There you go.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much for your time. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, everybody. And we'll see you again on the next webinar, of which we'll send details very soon. Thank you.